This program is a presentation of UCTV for educational and non-commercial use only.
So tonight what I want to talk to you about, what I want to tell you is mostly a story. It is a scientific story, but it is also a personal story. This is the last picture that was taken of me 2 weeks before my life took a very strange turn 17 years ago. I was a young 31-year-old, very ambitious and rather arrogant physician and scientist at the time, focusing mostly on research. And I was running a research lab in neuroimaging. And one evening, one of the subjects didn't come for the experiment. And we didn't want to waste the precious scanner time, so I got into the machine. And a few minutes later, my friend Jonathan Cohen, who today runs the neuroimaging program at Princeton University, but was only a student with me at the time, called me from the control room of the scanner and said, "David, there's something wrong. We're coming in." He came in the room, pulled me out of the machine, put his hand on mine and said, "David, there's something in your brain and we can't do the experiment." And that's how I learned that I had brain cancer. Of course, soon after that, I pursued conventional treatments, which saved my life. They don't look good, but they can be very helpful. I did reasonably well. However, a few years later, my cancer came back, which is the nature of these kinds of cancers. I had to go through surgery again. I had a year of chemotherapy. I did radiotherapy. And this is when I realized that if I stuck to only conventional treatments, which saved my life a second time, if I stuck to only that, I would have a conventional outcome which did not look good for my kind of cancer. So I used my skills as a physician and a scientist to find anything I could in the scientific literature, not in anything esoteric, in the scientific literature, that would help me strengthen my body's ability to resist cancer. And this is the scientific story I want to tell you tonight. The first thing I learned was at first depressing, but in the end very encouraging. I learned that we all have cancer cells in our bodies. This is a natural part of what biology does. It manufactures cancer cells. You can't do anything about that. We also all are exposed to cancer-promoting agents, carcinogens. They're part of gas exhaust on the street. You can't avoid that either. Now, the interesting fact is that only 1 in 4, and I don't know if only is the right word, but 1 in 4 of us will develop cancer in our lifetime. But that means that for people, even though 100% of us carry cancer cells and are exposed to carcinogens, 3 out of 4 of us are able to resist that process. So by definition, we have to conclude that for most of us, our bodies have natural defense mechanisms that can identify and destroy cancer cells so that it never becomes an active disease. Obviously, my defenses had failed, and so my purpose became to understand why our defenses often fail, and then how I could strengthen them so as to prevent this disease from coming back to the extent that I could. And this is what I learned. Clearly something is going on with cancer in our societies. We're seeing here the progression of breast cancer in the United States, and it's a phenomenon that starts around World War II and has been progressing ever since, reaching very high levels today. For a long time I was told in academic medicine that this is not a real increase in cancer rates because the population is aging, and that's part of the reason why there are more cancers. And also because we now do systematic screening, which mathematically increases the number of cancers. However, when I looked into this a bit more deeply, what I realized that this is baloney because cancer rates in children and adolescents have been increasing by 1 to 1.5% per year. for the last 30 years. Children are not older, and we do not screen for cancer in children. So there is something fundamental about our society and our way of living which is increasing cancer rates. The second thing I realized that this is a phenomenon that is quite regional. In fact, when you look at world maps established by the World Health Organization of cancer, looking at exact same age groups in countries all over the world using the same detection methods, then what you find is that cancer is primarily a disease of Western Northern societies, North America, Western Northern Europe. This is the breast cancer map that you're looking at here, but it's very similar for colon or prostate. When you find cancer in the Southern Hemisphere, lo and behold, you find it mostly in Australia and New Zealand, which have developed along the same lines of lifestyle that we have. When you find it in South America, it's in Argentina and Chile, which also have developed along our same lines. When you find it in Africa, the only country affected is South Africa. In the Middle East, the only country affected is Israel. So there's something about the way we live. The further proof of this comes from the fact that in some regions of China, especially rural regions of China, the investigators of the WHO could not find any case of breast cancer. Now think about the number of women you know around you affected by this disease, and now think about a whole region of China where you cannot find any case of breast cancer. It could be that Chinese women are protected by a particular genetic makeup. It could be. However, when you look at that, it's very interesting. Here are Chinese women by age group living in Shanghai in yellow here. You see their rates of breast cancer by age group. In here are Chinese women living in all places in San Francisco. And what you find is that within 1 or 2 generations, Chinese women living in San Francisco have exactly the same rates of breast cancer as American women. So it is not about being Chinese and having Chinese genes. It is about having a Chinese lifestyle or an American lifestyle. We find the same things for Japanese men and prostate cancer and so on. So that begs the question, if it is about lifestyle and if it started in 1945, what changed in our lifestyle in 1945? And I was very surprised to see that the answers are very clear when you look at the literature for them. About 6 things at least, and probably we'll find even more, but these are very definite changes in our lifestyle that started in 1945. The first one is sugar, and I'll get back to that in a minute. Why is sugar important? Cancer cells feed only on sugar. This was discovered in 1936. The person who discovered this got a Nobel Prize for it. They cannot eat up protein or lipids. They have to feed on sugar. We use that property to detect them when we do a PET scan where we inject radioactive glucose in the body and look for where it accumulates. It accumulates in tumors because cancer feeds on sugar. And we have completely changed our sugar consumption patterns after 1945. The second factor that changed is the fats in our diet. We invented trans fats around the late 30s. They started being abundant in industrial food after 1945. We've never been eating so many trans fats or so much trans fat as we're eating now. We've also completely changed the balance between essential fatty acids in our food when we changed the way we feed animals, and I'll get back to that. Chemical exposure, we have never been exposed to so many new chemicals, many of which are carcinogens since 1945. DDT, for example, the first chemical pesticide was invented in the late 30s, and the first usage was after World War II. Before World War II, there were none. Sedentarity, I do a little test with you. It will be your exercise for the evening. I'd like you to raise your arm and keep it up if your grandparents walked more than 15 minutes to go to school. Raise your arm. And keep it up, keep it up, keep it up. Now look around you. We're doing statistics, okay? Look around you. Good. You can bring your arm down. Now I'd like you to raise your arm and keep it up if your children or grandchildren are walking more than 15 minutes to go to school today. There should be a few in San Francisco. You at least have sidewalks. When you go to Houston or Austin, you ain't going to find no sidewalks there. So here there's a few people who do. But even here, you notice the dramatic relationship we have to the change in relationship we have to physical activity just in 50 years. That has never happened in the history of mankind. Okay. The fifth factor is social support. We know from every single social study that has looked at that the number one factor that limits the negative impact that stress can have on the biology of the body is the density of your network of relationships. Now, and this is my favorite part of the talk, we Americans, I love saying that, we Americans now move on average every 5 years. That means every 5 years we disconnect from our neighbors, we move further away from a number of our friends, and generally further away from our cousins, our aunts and uncles, our brothers and sisters, and certainly our parents. And originally we do this on purpose, but eventually it catches up with us, because when life becomes a challenge and major difficulties are part of our routine, then we no longer have this extraordinary network of relationships to help us through hard times, which has always been part of the heritage of humanity until the last 50 years. And the final factor I might have time to discuss tonight is sun exposure. It's interesting that the body manufactures vitamin D when the skin is exposed to the sun without sunscreen. Without sunscreen. Now, it might sound heretic what I'm talking about, but this is the only way the skin can manufacture vitamin D. In the last 20 to 30 years, you'll see that we've massively reduced our manufacturing of vitamin D through our changed relationship with sunlight. And vitamin D is one of the best protective factors against cancer, as I will hopefully have a little bit of time to demonstrate. So these are at least 6 factors that have profoundly changed in the last 50 years that might be contributing to this epidemic of cancer. Let's go over some of these in more detail. Sugar consumption. Here we are. In the 1800s, we used to eat in America 12 pounds of refined sugar per person and per year. In 2000, we're now eating 154 pounds of refined sugar per person and per year. Now, this means for a household of 4 people, that's 600 pounds of refined sugar that comes through the household every year. This is mind-boggling, because I don't think any one of us has seen 600 pounds of refined sugar going through the house. And Don reminded me he doesn't eat any sugar. I barely eat any. Neither does Michael. So there's a few families in here who've got to be up in the 1,800 pounds, to compensate for just the 3 of us, right? How do we get all this sugar in our houses and then in our bodies? Well, we invented something remarkable, again in the 1930s, which became part of our lifestyle, which is the most effective vehicle for hiding sugar and getting it into people. And we've been very effective at it. This is what we did. Look at this ad from the 1950s. For a better start in life, start cola earlier. So we invented a formidable vehicle for getting sugar into people, because they don't even notice it. You drink the Coke, does it change what you're going to eat? Are you going to have less of the pasta? Are you going to have less of the dessert? I don't think so. In fact, you might still have that ice cream float at the end with more Coke, right? And you don't even notice the sugar. This would all be just fun if it didn't have a real impact on cancer. And this was the most controversial thing I said in the first edition of my book, Anti-Cancer. And it has been confirmed since. This is a 2009 study. There's practically a dose-response relationship between the amount of sugar in somebody's diet and the risk of developing ER plus PR negative breast cancer. This was just published in 2009. Second factor, fats. These are essential fatty acids. We call them essential because they're part of every cell membrane in the body. They're part of every biological process in the body, but the body cannot manufacture them. So the only place we can get them from is our food. Not in their food, not in the body. Now, interestingly, there are 2 families, the omega-3 family and the omega-6 family. They have very different properties. Once in the body, they get metabolized into very active biological substances. The omega-6 fatty acids get metabolized into pro-inflammatory prostaglandins, into substances that increase clotting, and into substances that stimulate cell growth. Remember that, stimulate cell growth. The omega-3 fatty acids do just the opposite. They reduce inflammation, they reduce clotting, and they reduce cell growth. When they're both in balance in your plate, they're in balance in your physiology, and everything's fine. However, this is what we started doing. 1940, we invented the use of soy oil and particularly hydrogenated, which is trans fat, soy oil for industrial products. And the consumption by human beings has skyrocketed. You see again a new phenomenon which has skyrocketed since World War II. Furthermore, we invented the new farm. I was raised in part on a farm in Normandy. And the color of the farm was not this one. What is the color that's missing from this? Green. That's right. Now, why is that important? Because grass is very rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Therefore, when cows eat grass, there are omega-3 fatty acids in milk, in butter, in cheese, in cream, and in meat. Same thing for hens, who used to eat grass and seeds and worms, very rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Now we feed these animals only with corn and soy. And the omega-3s disappear from the food chain, and the omega-6s shoot up, which are, corn and soy are full of omega-6s. Now, nobody told you about this, and we didn't think it would have consequences, but it does. Look at what it does to the food products. I was able to find data about the ratio of omega-6s and 3s in butter in 1960, which is a reasonably good ratio. Butter wasn't such a bad food in Normandy when I was growing up. Pork, beef, eggs, and this is in 2000. Butter has become a pro-inflammatory food. The worst offender are eggs. Eggs on my Normandy farm when I was a kid were a health food filled with omega-3 fatty acids essential for the development of the brain of children. And my grandmother kept me eating these eggs. Now these are eggs in 2000. 20 times more omega-6s than omega-3s. Eggs have become a pro-inflammatory food. And nobody told you that. So when you go to the supermarket, look for omega-3 eggs, and they're not eggs that have been injected with fish oil. They're normal eggs. These eggs should be marked as pro-inflammatory omega-6 eggs, and the normal eggs should just say normal eggs. They shouldn't say omega-3 eggs. This is what happened over millions of years. You see, as hominids developed, there was always a balance in their food between omega-6s and omega-3 fatty acids. And then something happened around 1945 when we started increasing omega-6s in the diet of animals and therefore in the diet of people and reducing omega-3s. Now think about a lawnmower. Most of you have operated one at one point or another or looked at somebody operate one. They need to be filled with just the right proportion of gasoline and oil. If you play around with the proportions and they're not right, the engine is going to sputter and may not function at all. This is what we're doing. We have a biology that is meant to function with this mix. This is the mix we're putting in. It created problems. The main problem is this one. Remember, omega-6s stimulate cell growth. Now, the only cells that can grow in an adult body are fat and cancer. We're seeing this for sure. In fact, I'm going to show you something reasonably dramatic. This is the map of a country you love and care about, and I do too. And this is the map of obesity, a BMI over 30. This is marked obesity. This is not just a little bit of overweight. In 1985, this is the year I arrived in Pittsburgh to do my PhD. And Pittsburgh's right here. People looked normal in Pittsburgh in 1985. This is the map in 1985. Some states had less than 10% obesity. Some had already between 10 and 14% obesity, darker blue. And then this is what we did to ourselves that I want you to take a look at. 1986, 1987, 1988, 1989, 1990, 1991, 1992, first states with 15 to 20%, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, states with more than 20% obesity, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, states with more than a quarter of the people obese, 2002, 2003, in 2004, 2005, the first states with more than a third of the people obese, 2006, 2007. Remember, obesity is one of the leading risk factors for cancer. Of course, people don't get cancer as soon as they become obese. It takes 10 to 20 years. So this may be the map and the progression of cancer rates in our country over the next 10 to 20 years, if we don't do something about that. Now, it's not just about fat, as I told you. This is a study in mice, looking at mice that have been grafted with breast cancer. And after a certain number of days, you can count the number of tumors on their breast, and they keep going up and up and up. If they're fed with corn oil on top of their regular diet, which is full of omega-6 fatty acids, this is what happens to the number of tumors. It is like adding fuel to the fire. If it were true just of mice, this would all be fine. Unfortunately, this also happens to women. This is a study that was done in Singapore. You cannot do these studies in the US because people have so much fatty acids, that omega-6s, that everybody's in this range here. But you have to go to countries where there's more range of consumption of omega-6 fatty acids. And you're looking at the number of cases of advanced breast cancer as a function of how much omega-6 fatty acids are present in the woman's diet. And you see a dose-response curve with a 2.5 risk of increasing the chances of getting a breast cancer. To give you a sense of whether that's important or not, hormone replacement therapy is associated with a 1.4 increased risk of breast cancer, and it's a big deal. So think about a 2.5. Okay. Chemical contamination started in 1940, exploded since then. How do we do this? Well, we're very good at spraying chemicals over our food. Now, it turns out that these compounds have powerful effects on biology. In fact, they're called endocrine disruptors because they mimic hormones, often estrogen-like hormones, so much so that when they end up in our rivers, they can change the sex of male frogs to female frogs. It turns out that exposed farm workers have much higher cancer risks, and the children of these farmers, even though they're not in the field, have higher risk of a variety of cancers simply from the residues of pesticides that their parents bring in the house on their clothing. Now, pesticide manufacturers tell us, yes, but we're not using the same pesticides as in the past. At least they don't accumulate in the body fat. People are able to eliminate them through their urine, so it's not as bad. Okay, fine. Let's look at a study of 42 children at the University of Seattle, ages 2 to 5, that either ate a conventional diet, and you can look at pesticide residues in their urine every day. So yes, they eliminate them, but they're exposed every day. Then they move to a 70% organic diet, and these go away. Then back on the conventional diet, and these explode again. So this is what's happening to our children. Household products. There are a variety. I can't go through all of this because we don't have enough time, but a lot of it is in the book. Household products are another way for us to be exposed to a variety of contaminants. One of the most common ones is dry cleaning. This suit was dry cleaned, and for years I practiced the worst possible way of dealing with this. I made sure, like many of you do, when I brought back my clothing from the dry cleaner, that I would keep it in the plastic bag and put it like this in my closet, so that when I would end up wearing my suit, I would have maintained the maximum concentration of carcinogenic tetrachloroethylene that I could then inhale and spread throughout my body. We know that people who work in those shops have much higher cancer rates than the rest of the population. People who live above dry cleaning shops have higher cancer rates than the rest of the population. When you bring back your dry cleaning, air it out for at least 2 hours before you put it in your closet or before you wear it. I'm not going to go over everything, but this is a striking one to remember. Phthalates in cosmetics and perfumes are associated with cancer. A few years ago, a magazine did a review of the different perfumes with the highest concentrations of phthalates, and one of the leading contenders was a perfume by Dior called Poison, so remember that. Don't heat liquids and foods in polycarbonated plastic that releases bisphenol A, which has now been found to prevent chemotherapy from killing cancer cells. There's a whole controversy about skin contact with aluminum. I just want to tell you about this. The science is not very good, but it's rather fun to go through, so I do that. A lot of women have been worrying for some time about the antiperspirants that contain aluminum. Does it increase breast cancer risk or not? In theory, it could, because what most women do is shave their armpits under the shower, and then they dry that. But they've created little nicks on the skin. And right after this, they apply the antiperspirant. And the aluminum can get through the nicks on the skin, be absorbed by the lymphatic system, get drained to the breast gland, and create inflammation there that can promote cancer growth. So is there an increased risk of breast cancer with aluminum antiperspirant? This is an interesting new case study. Not definitive science, but fun to go through, as I said. These are women who apply shave their armpits and apply antiperspirant. This is the average age at which they've recorded to develop breast cancer in the UK. These are women who shave but don't use antiperspirant. They get breast cancer later on average. These women use antiperspirant but don't shave. They also get breast cancer later. These women don't use antiperspirant, don't shave, don't have sex very often, but they end up having breast cancer later. A few words about sunlight. Sunlight as a vitamin. 20 minutes of exposure of your torso and arms and face without sunscreen in the sun of summertime will create 20,000 international units of vitamin D, which then gets stored in your body much more efficiently, in fact, than if you take it as a supplement. So sunlight is a vitamin. Why is that important? Well, this is the amount of vitamin D, the minimal amount of vitamin D you want to have in your blood. So get a blood test tomorrow morning if you get a chance, and you want to be above 30 nanograms per milliliter, definitely. Something happened to us between 1994 and 2004, just 10 years. Okay, this is the number of people in this country who had sufficient levels of vitamin D by age group. You see a marked drop in every age category. There's only 20% of people over 60 who have enough vitamin D in their system to protect them from cancer. Only 20%, barely more, even in youngsters. Right? So this argues for a 75 to 80% rate of deficiency in the United States. Why is that important? Well, look at this. This is the relationship between breast cancer death and level of sunshine. So here's Pittsburgh. I don't know where San Francisco is. I haven't looked for it. San Diego. A lot more sunshine in Honolulu and Phoenix. So wherever there's more sun, Tampa, Fort Worth, wherever there's more sun, Miami, lower rates of breast cancer. Wherever there's less, New York, Chicago, higher rates of breast cancer. And it's a very, very clean correlation. Now, I've given you all the bad news. Let's talk about some of the things we can do, having understood all this. The first thing is that for the last 40 years, all of oncology has been focused on destroying cancer cells, which is important. Again, it saved my life. However, there was an article in the New York Times, front page article about 6 months ago on the war on cancer started by Richard Nixon in 1971, almost 40 years ago. Which showed that we spent between $150 and $200 billion on cancer research in the last 40 years. And we've improved the median survival of metastatic cancer, which is really the only one that kills you, by 3 months. $200 billion. So maybe we're not pursuing quite the right roadmap. And what I'm saying, what a lot of other people like Michael, like Donald have been saying for some time, is that yes, it's great to kill cancer cells, but obviously it doesn't seem to be enough. It is important at the same time to strengthen the body's ability to resist cancer by creating an inhospitable terrain to cancer growth. And you can do both at the same time. This is not about alternative medicine. It's not about treating cancer with broccoli and meditation. It's about treating cancer with the best classical conventional medicine we have and broccoli and meditation. And let me show you why. First of all, these natural defenses are not pie in the sky. They're very real. This is human blood with cancer cells and white blood cells from the immune system. All of us have cancer cells. All of us have white blood cells that can identify and destroy them if we don't interfere with the ability of our natural defenses to do their job. See, here's another one that's going to get gobbled up, and here's another one. This is part of every one of us. We just need to learn how to help our defenses do their work. When we do, wonderful things happen. This is a study, again, reasonably recent, looked at 10,000 people. And it looked at basic health habits that support natural defenses and their impact not on quality of life, their impact on the hardest endpoint of all, survival, mortality and survival. Now, what you're looking at here is the curve for people who did none of the 4 health behaviors, 1, 2, 3, and all 4. And these are the survival curves over a period of 14 years. The 4 health behaviors to help not interfere with natural defenses were not smoking, not drinking more than 2 alcoholic beverages a day, eating 5 fruits or vegetables per day. It counted lousy fruits and vegetables that, like bananas don't really are anti-cancer, or potatoes, not really anti-cancer, but it counted them anyway. And 30 minutes of physical activity 5 times a week. Okay, so we're looking at people who had all 4 here and people who had none here. A 4-time difference in mortality risk over a 14-year period. Now, the interesting question is, that a lot of patients ask, doctor, if I do all these things you asked me to do, will I live longer, or will it just seem like it's lasting a very long time? Oh, by the way, I should add one thing. In terms of mortality, the reduction in mortality was about the same for heart disease, which everybody would seem obvious, and cancer. Now, who had heard that you could act on cancer prevention about as much as you can on heart disease prevention? Now, this is prevention. Let's look at people who have cancer now. And this is a stunning study that was published in 2008 from Ohio State University, which did not make it in the New York Times, which infuriates me. 222 women had all gone through breast cancer and the best breast cancer treatment in National Cancer Institute approved centers around the country. Then they were divided into 2 groups. One group only had treatment as usual, which means we didn't ask them to change anything to their way of life, and we only looked at whether the cancer would return early or not. And this is their survival curve over the next 11 years. And this group, women were randomized to this group, so they were exactly equivalent at the beginning. After treatment, they participated in a 1-year program, meeting once a week for 4 months, then once a month for the remaining 8 months, where they learned how to eat slightly differently, include more physical activity in their lives, reach in themselves to manage stress by learning a basic breathing yoga technique, like Michael was teaching folks who had cancer in the 1970s and being considered a lunatic for doing that. And 4th, they learned how to reach out to friends in their lives for support during difficult times, which not all of us know how to do, especially if we're American. So these women, after 11 years, had a 68% reduction in mortality. 68% reduction in mortality. We do not know of a single conventional treatment that compares with that result. And it didn't make it to the New York Times. So ask me during the question period why. This I want to show you because it explains so much about the resistance of a lot of conventional oncologists to these approaches, and maybe the most important slide of the whole talk. So concentrate with me for 1 second. All of these women had breast cancer as well, all had treatment. Following treatment, some of them didn't do anything special, and this is their survival curve here, the gray line, okay? Then these women, the yellow-green line, made an effort to eat 5 fruits or vegetables per day. Again, there was not very discriminative. That included fruits and vegetables that are known to not particularly help with cancer, but there were at least 5 of them per day. Now what you see is a little bit perhaps of a benefit in the early years, but the bottom line, no difference. Now I want to show you this because this is what most oncologists believe. You ask them, should I eat differently? Well, do whatever you want. It won't make much of a difference. It's the usual answer, right? This is because they know these kinds of studies. There have been many of these. Now, the red line are women who include physical activity in their lives 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Interesting, they get more of a benefit, right? Last longer in terms of survival, but in the end, no difference. Again, your oncologist will tell you, yeah, exercise is good for you, you won't die of a heart attack. But in terms of cancer, no difference. Now, I wouldn't be showing you this slide if there wasn't a different twist to it, which is the blue line. The blue line happens to be the women who both eat 5 fruits and vegetables per day and include 30 minutes of physical activity 5 times a week. And something magical happens. They lift their survival chances dramatically. Now, I want to emphasize this because, you know, in conventional medicine, it seems like they would want us in integrative medicine to be able to prove that broccoli in and of itself, and if possible just one molecule in broccoli, you know, like sulforaphane or indole-3-carbinol, can slow down cancer. Whereas they, on the other hand, when they treat cancer, any cancer, always use at least 3 drugs, right? They always use the synergy of medications. We do that for AIDS with tritherapy. We do that for tuberculosis with 3 antibiotics. But we in integrative medicine, we wouldn't be able to rely on the synergy of the things we do. Doesn't make any sense. Obviously, if you're going to use broccoli and exercise, you better combine them. And you're much more likely to find an effect on a course of cancer when you do multiple interventions. And the insight of the early pioneers in this field, like Michael, like Donald, has always been that. Telling their patients, do as much as you can to change your lifestyle. It's not just about adding pomegranate juice or drinking green tea. These are great things to do, but just one thing isn't going to make a difference, right? You're going to have to combine them. Change your lifestyle. So this is a very important slide. Foods. The good news is that foods are made of molecules, of course, and some of these molecules have been absolutely identified and characterized as potent anti-cancer agents. This is a paper in Nature in 2003. This is the curcumin of turmeric, the famous Indian yellow spice that is such a powerful anti-cancer agent. The gingerol of ginger, the EGCG of green tea, the sulforaphane of broccoli, the indole-3-carbinol of the whole cabbage family. The lycopene of tomato sauce, the genistein of soy, and so on. These molecules have potent anti-cancer effects. And at the University of Montreal, a cancer researcher who'd been working for 20 years trying to identify new cancer drugs by putting a drop of the drug in a colony of cancer cell and looking at its capacity to slow down, inhibit cancer growth, once read an article in Nature about green tea and decided that in his $40 million lab equipment, he was going to add a $50 juicer, and he started juicing garlic and broccoli and cabbage and putting a little drop of that juice in the cancer cell colonies, just like he'd done with the chemicals for 20 years. And lo and behold, what he found is that drops of some of these vegetables, not all of them, but some of them, were capable of inhibiting cancer growth by 100%. This is for a colon cancer cell line. The beauty of this, though, is that when you identify a drug that inhibits cancer growth by 100%, 99% of the time it is so toxic that it can never become a useful medication. When you do this with cabbage, this is something that the human race has been eating for perhaps 100,000 years. You know that it is completely safe. Furthermore, it would have been bad news if, to be effective, you had to eat cabbage and only cabbage 3 days a week for the rest of your life. It could have been also that once you start mixing cabbage with beetroots or garlic or whatever, they inhibited each other's benefits on cancer cells. It turns out to be exactly the opposite. Once again, we see the law of synergy. Now this is the typical anti-cancer plate. Again, I'm not going to go into all the detail, but just a few points. First of all, it doesn't look like the American national dish. Okay, the hamburger and French fries is probably the worst possible thing you could do to your body, because red meat has been associated with increasing cancer rates everywhere it's been studied, especially when it's grilled, and barbecued grilled is probably the worst thing you can do, because it brings up all these carcinogen nitrosamines onto the meat. Then we take that meat, and which is omega-6, full of omega-6 fatty acids, because the beef hasn't eaten any grass. Okay, we take that meat and we combine it with one of the only vegetables that has no anti-cancer properties, which is potatoes, which raises blood sugar in addition when you eat it. Then we take that potato, we dip it into omega-6 oil. To make sure we get a bit more of these omega-6s to increase inflammation. Then we fry the oil so that it will suck up all of our antioxidant defenses when we eat them. Not enough, because this would be just like the French national dish, you know, steak and French fries. We Americans like to improve on things, so we add ketchup, which is full of high fructose corn syrup, to increase insulin response and more inflammation. And we put a white bun, and the white flour is just like eating sugar, and it raises blood sugar as well. And we make that our national dish. If you want to invent a national dish for a foreign country you don't like, you can export this, which is in fact what we do. And and we've seen rates of cancer and obesity and diabetes go up practically everywhere around the world as they begin to import this way of eating. Now, the anti-cancer plate is the opposite. It is, you know, this is the key concept. If you remember just one thing about how to eat differently, instead of having 80% animal protein, meat usually, and a few vegetables fighting it out in your plate, eat like our ancestors used to eat even 50 years ago. Eat 80% vegetables, and you can have a little meat. It doesn't matter. Use meat as a taste-enhancing condiment, not as the core of what you're eating. If you really like animal protein, eat fish, full of omega-3 fatty acids. Okay? That's the core concept. In terms of fats, go back to your kitchen cabinet tonight, look for all these oils that are there. Get rid of corn oil, of sunflower oil, of soybean oil. Do not give it to your neighbor or your relatives. There's nothing else you can do with it than put it in the garbage. Replace that by olive oil and canola oil, and do all of your cooking with that, all of your salad dressing with that. These have potent anti-cancer agents in them. You can use butter if it is 1960 butter. Well, that exists. It's called omega-3 butter nowadays, but it's just 1960 butter. Okay, comes from animals who have eaten grass or linseeds to balance their fatty acids. Same with eggs. Eggs are a good source of food and protein as long as they're omega-3 eggs, which means normal eggs. Include a lot of beans, lentils, chickpeas in your diet, because this will provide all the protein you need if you cut down on animal products. Add garlic and onion to almost all of your dishes. Because they have potent anti-cancer agents and they enhance flavor. Don't do it with desserts. Doesn't work as well. And finally, put as many Mediterranean herbs in your diet as you can. Basil, rosemary, oregano, thyme, mint. All of these have potent anti-cancer agents in them, and they enhance the flavor of food. This is not a boring diet. This is a diet you can stay on forever. Our ancestors did, people around the Mediterranean did, and this is where our best culinary traditions come from. You know, whether it be Morocco or Greece or Tunisia, south of France, Italy. This is an Italian diet of 1950. I guarantee you they loved their foods, and they didn't miss the hamburgers. Now, the only really bad news about this is you don't see much dessert on that because it brings up blood sugar. So dessert is mostly fruit. Some fruits have specific anti-cancer activity, such as raspberry, strawberries, blueberries. But even now we know plums, apricots, the large stone fruits, have anti-cancer activity as well. And maybe one last thing I want to say, yeah, chocolate. It's not on the plate, but chocolate is helpful because if you eat dark chocolate, at least 70% cocoa, it doesn't have as much sugar in it, And chocolate itself has anti-cancer properties. It has polyphenols like in green tea. And it's very satiating, and it gives you a nice feeling of having had dessert without really having had dessert. So I recommend chocolate. You can have 1 or 2 glasses of red wine per day, which contains resveratrol, also has anti-cancer activity, as long as it is eaten in the context of a Mediterranean diet. If you have red wine with hamburger and french fries, it's a disaster. If you provide your body with the right antioxidants and plant-based chemicals to surround it, it becomes an anti-cancer food. A few words about vitamin D, just to show you that this is incredible, because we don't have this for very many natural interventions. This is a double-blind study, controlled, double-blind, randomized study of giving people vitamin D or a placebo and looking at cancer rates. And what you're seeing is that the folks who have vitamin D as opposed to placebo, don't look at the calcium thing, is irrelevant, have a 75% reduction in the probability of developing any kind of cancer. It's not just one kind, it's any kind. 75%. If you stop smoking, you reduce your chances of getting cancer by 30%. So you should still stop smoking. But this is even more important than tobacco, and it's amazing that every single patient in cancer centers haven't had a vitamin D level drawn on them, and a recommendation for getting their vitamin D to an adequate amount, which is, I remind you, if you have cancer, it probably should be closer to 60 ng per ml, but at very least above 30. 70% of cancer patients in this country are deficient in vitamin D. I want to talk a little bit about the psychological aspects of cancer, because cancer is not just about broccoli and jogging and getting a tan. Okay, there's more to it than that, and for many of us who have gone through the experience, it's a searing interior journey. And one of the key questions that always comes up is, how has my stress contributed to me getting cancer? 40% of women who have breast cancer, for example, are convinced that it came from something that happened to them, a divorce, the illness of a child, a move that didn't go well, the loss of a job, or whatever. Now, it is interesting, most oncologists know these studies that find no relationship between stress and cancer. This is a breast cancer study. This is about 10,000 women in Finland. I think they had to go to Finland because they wanted a group of women with no stress, and they couldn't get that in America. And then they looked at some women with some stress and severe stress. And it's interesting, if you look at stress, you do not see any impact of stress itself on the risk of developing cancer. And that is definitely true. And when your oncologist tells you stress has nothing to do with it, this is what she or he means. Now let me tell you, I think the story is more complicated than that. We cannot do the proper experiments in human beings, of course, because you'd have to create stress to see if experimentally it makes a difference. But you can do that in animals. And it has been done. This is a study of rats where they're grafted with an aggressive tumor. And within a month, you see that about half the rats reject the tumor, and natural defenses get rid of it. Half of them do that. These rats grafted with the same tumor are put in a cage where they get uncontrollable electric shocks. And after a month of that treatment, it really gets to them. They become hopeless, despaired rats. They have no control over their environment and have given up. When you put a hand in their cage, they don't fight back. They stop eating and they stop mating. These rats, on the other hand, are grafted with the same... Oh, by the way, and then only a quarter of them are capable of rejecting the tumor. As if that state of despair had been affecting their ability to mount a defense against cancer. Now look at these rats, on the other hand. They are grafted with the same tumor, exposed to exactly the same number of uncontrollable shocks as these. But they learn that by pressing a lever placed in the cage, they can escape extra shocks. Something really interesting happens, because these rats continue to feel rather good about themselves. They have healthy rat self-esteem. When you put your hand in the cage, they will bite you. They continue to eat, they continue to mate, just because they have not completely lost control. And lo and behold, if anything, they reject tumors better than the rats that are left alone. So it's a matter of not giving up because you continue to feel that there's something you can do that gives you a sense of effectiveness. At least in rats. Now, what's the story about people? Well, what do we know about people? We know that the number one factor that makes people not feel helpless and hopeless is the nature of support that they have, human connectedness. That is the number one factor. I was telling you a bit about this at the beginning. I want to give you one example of this, so it's not just abstract, but it's the story of a real person. This person is named Mish. She was somebody I followed in Pittsburgh. She was a woman in her early 50s who had aggressive inflammatory breast cancer, had a double mastectomy, had chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And the treatment was very harsh on her. And I asked her what was the most difficult moment, and she said, well, that's when I had lost all my hair, my eyebrows, and my eyelashes. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and all I saw was a light bulb with eyes. And so I asked Mish, this must have been really hard. What helped you bear with us? What helped you go through that experience? And she said, she's a very thoughtful woman. She said, I'd like to think a little bit about this before I answer you. And a few days later, she sent me an email that I'd like to read to you, but somebody's going to have to give me a copy of my book so I can read it to you. My husband gave me a card early in my illness, which I pinned up in front of me on the bulletin board at work. I read it frequently. Here's what the card said. The cover read, "Open this card and hold it close to you. Now, squeeze." Inside, my husband wrote, "You are my everything. My joy in the morning, even on the days we don't make love. My sexy and warm and laughing mid-morning daydream. My phantom lunchmate. My building excitement at mid-afternoon. My soothing joy at seeing you when I get home. My workout decompressor. My sous chef, my playmate, my lover, my all." The card continued. "It's going to be just fine." He wrote under that, "And I'll be there at your side, always. Love, PJ." He was by my side every step of the way. His card meant so much to me and buoyed me throughout my journey. Since you asked, Mish. So I wanted to read this to you because it conveys powerfully how meaningful that connection can be in the most difficult times of our lives. I'm also fully aware we don't all have a PJ in our lives during those difficult times. But fortunately, what the research shows is that when you look at women who have had breast cancer and you look at their survival, those who say they have at least one or two friends that they can count on have a 4-time reduction in the risk of dying of their tumor. And it doesn't make much of a difference to have up to 10 friends. I mean, I don't know who has 10 friends, It doesn't add that much. 1 or 2 are enough. Interestingly, husbands actually don't make much of a difference. I'm sad to report. But this is a very important bit of news. And why is it that every oncologist doesn't tell you that this can reduce your chances of dying by a factor of 4? There aren't many drugs that do that. We should all learn how to reach out for this kind of support. And it can be, the beauty about friends is they, unlike husbands or wives, they don't have to be all in one. You can have one friend who will help you sort through medical information because they're the engineer type, or the lawyer type, or the doctor type. Or you can have another friend who will, bring food to the kids on the evenings where you're too weak to cook for them. You can have another friend whose shoulder you can cry on or who will make you laugh, because that's important too. And you can have specialized friends. Just build your team of supporters. So this is the last slide, which summarizes the whole concept I've tried to push forward on my fellow physicians and also on fellow cancer patients, which is that what is cancer? Well, cancer may well be just the loss of balance in the body between two powerful forces. One being the forces that increase cancer growth. And that includes cancer promoters such as tobacco and alcohol in excess, sugar and white flour, omega-6 fatty acids and trans fats, chemical pollutants of different kinds, a sedentary lifestyle with no physical activity, helplessness and powerlessness, and the lack of sunshine. All of these are documented to increase your cancer risk by promoting cancer growth in the body. In the other column, there are the powerful cancer inhibitors, anti-cancer plant-based chemicals that are mostly part of vegetables, omega-3 fatty acids from fatty fish and green vegetables, detox phytochemicals. I love that. You know, if you eat broccoli and vegetables of the cabbage family, they actually stimulate the liver's ability to get rid of carcinogens. So though we're exposed to carcinogens, if we eat enough of these, it may make much less of an impact on our body. Physical activity that cleans up the body of carcinogens, stimulates the immune system, reduces peaks of sugar and glucose and insulin. Social support and techniques for basic stress management, and enough sunshine or vitamin D supplements. Now, you can look at these two columns and make a little mental accounting of where do I fit on this grid? Where's my balance? How does it tilt? And you can begin to change that, which I think is the core message of what I'm trying to say. And I want to end with one very important concept. As a physician, I have been properly trained, I think, to be careful to never give people false hopes. And that was a big concern I had when I started writing this book. You know, am I going to be giving people false hopes? Because that would be a criticism I would have a hard time dealing with. And then I realized that what is happening is that a lot of people around us, a lot of people in this room maybe, are living with hopelessness, because they believe that cancer is a genetic lottery, that once you have it, it's out of your control. And I realized that what all of this science shows us is that it is a false hopelessness. And that what we need to fight for is real hope. And I hope you and I can engage together in this fight after tonight. Thank you for your attention.